If you're doing one genre of photography, you're probably not going to ask people that are interested in another genre of photography. And I guess at this point, what's interesting is you're looking more external than internal at this point.
Right.
So we're making that
Right.
shift of this is the work I'm trying to do. This is how I want to do it. That's the internal side, which you bring up so wonderfully throughout the podcast. This is saying, okay, now who on the outside is going to like my work? Who is going to buy that work, or who's going to want to use it for their editorials or something like that? What I want people to think about is, instead of people chasing the market versus developing the market that fits their work.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt Payne, and this is episode 462 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. This week's conversation is one that I really hope you listen to all the way through because it's packed with practical, hard-earned insight that applies whether you photograph your backyard or travel halfway around the world. My guest is Patrick Krohn, winner of the Natural Landscape Photography Awards In Your Backyard Special Award. Patrick has spent years refining a photographic life built around local practice, slow seeing, and showing up consistently. And along the way, he's learned some surprisingly transferable lessons from sales, photojournalism, and even athletics. We talk about staying creatively in shape by photographing close to home, why not everyone is your audience, how failure can quietly move your work forward, and what it really means to build a meaningful photography practice without chasing trends or epic locations. If you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or unsure what to photograph next, this episode offers a roadmap that's both grounding and actionable. Let's dive into my conversation with Patrick Krohn. All right. Patrick Krohn, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course, man. I've been a huge fan of your photography for a while now, and I feel like your name gets recommended at least a couple of times a year for the last few years, so people
Wow.
are paying attention to you that appreciate your style of photography. So
I would not have thought that. I noticed last year when I put my stuff together for the NLPA critique for that year, and my pictures came up and you'd said, "Oh, I like his work." I'm like, "You even know I exist? Okay, that's cool." So I thought, hey, that's kind of nice. So thanks.
Yeah, of course. Well, cool, man. So for other people who aren't familiar with you and your photography, would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how photography is kind of threaded through your life.
Yeah, it's been a long thread. So so I'll start off. Hey, I'm Patrick Krohn. I'm also known as One-Eyed Dog Studios. I live in Aiken, South Carolina, which most people have probably not heard of. It's about an hour outside of Columbia, which is the state capital, but also just down the road from a little place named Augusta, where you might have heard of a little golf tournament there at one point,
Yes.
been involved with that too, but that's another story. I've been a nature and landscape photographer since about 2019, but it's been a long and windy road to get to there. And it started, I wanted to say this, last century. So it's been a while. I've been around in photography. I've been connected and interested in photography since I was a little kid. I had one of those 110 cameras. I was probably well before your time. 110s. My brothers and sisters did. I come from a family of 8 kids. But it's really funny because I don't remember much of my family taking pictures as we're growing up, but we've got tons and tons of pictures of all of us growing up. So it's kind of a funny thing. It just wasn't that important to me to notice, I guess. But it was in high school where I moved 4 times in high school. My dad was in oil, so he traveled around, and I was in sophomore year moved to New Zealand for 18 months. I was a sophomore in high school to junior in high school, which is 5th form and 6th form if you're playing along in one of those countries that have a different education system. So he was building a plant down in New Zealand at the time. He was one of the executives, so that's why we all got dragged down there. Just had a great time. Like I said, for about 18 months. My best friend was a Kiwi. I usually hung out with them more than anything. He let me borrow one of his cameras sometimes, and we'd go out and play around and photograph, and he showed me how to develop and print my first pictures. And I think all of us and everybody you've ever had on this podcast that has ever talked about developing pictures, you see that first print show up, you're like, this is the coolest thing. I got to do this more. And I, of course, told myself that I would be doing this the rest of my life, to have a job in it. I'd be world famous. I'd travel all over the place and I'd make $1 million, right? We're going to get real famous on that. Well, not much of that happened. Just the photography part happened. And actually, what's kind of fun is I still have that very first print I ever made. So I was able to keep that. Yeah, so I always remember it, and I've used it in some of my presentations because it's kind of fun to just go, yeah, that was that moment. And it still kind of gives you that little thrill of remembering what it was like to see that come up. So I came back to the States and then went to college in California because just before moving to New Zealand, we lived in California, and I really liked it there. And I went to the University of the Pacific, where I was supposed to be an engineer like my dad. But that lasted a few minutes. Once I started taking photo and art classes, it was like, nope, that's what I'm going to do. So I went the other direction. My teacher at the time, photo teacher, was very abstract, very avant-garde, but he had a brother who was a photojournalist. And so he suggested, he goes, yeah, you're more of a documentary photographer. You're not more of this crazy art photographer like he was. So he suggested I go off to journalism school. So I transferred out of there, went to the University of Missouri in Columbia, where I graduated with a journalism degree. After that, I did an internship in Denver, of all places. I don't know, do you know a photographer named Rich Clarkson?
I do not.
Okay, he's actually still around. I didn't realize that when I Googled it the other day. He was at Sports Illustrated, National Geographic. In the journalism world, he's like one of the names. He started a lot of careers. Great guy. So I was just a gopher for the summer at his internships, or to his 2 workshops. Did that. It was a lot of fun. When I left that, got a job in Provo, Utah. So I worked there for 5 years. Actually, the very first weekend I was there, I met this cute little girl in the circulation department who 2 years later I married, and still married to 33 years later, I think is what it is, something like that. So yeah, like I said, I left that to go to Butte, Montana. So in journalism, you usually go up in size, go to a bigger newspaper. I decided to go down in size. I went to a smaller newspaper. And because there was a lot more freedom, a lot more creativity that I could control, had a good editorial staff. So it was a lot of fun to do that. So it was a good call in that regards. But Butte, Montana is up in the middle of nowhere. And the rest of my family has migrated to the Southeast. My parents had just retired to Florida. So I decided to get a job at the Augusta Chronicles. That's what moved me to the Georgia and South Carolina area. I did that for about 2 years, but then the company kind of spit me up, chewed me up and spit me out type of thing, where after that stint, I left to go into the advertising side of the business. Did that for 5 years total between the newspaper and a magazine that they owned. Knowing that journalism was kind of dying out, I decided it's better to get out of that whole field, and I'm glad I did. So I was actually while I was doing that advertising, I was working on my MBA, so I was doing a little bit of schooling as well. So for a few years, I sold copiers, I sold fiberglass, stuff like that. So it was kind of very weird. Yeah. Finally left sales completely because, I'm kind of an introvert, so it wasn't always the best place for me. It wasn't where I clicked, but it was a good income for a while, so it was nice. I now work as a pricing analyst in Aiken for a US-based manufacturer here. So that's kind of nice. We actually have a plant here, so we make stuff. I've been doing that for about 14 years. What I call my intermediate years are the times between 2000 and 2016 or so. I still did a lot of photography. I had little point and shoots, things like that. I still kept up with it a little bit by doing little projects with my daughter. For 10 years, I've been photographing her in our azaleas every year. So that's kind of a neat project I've been working on. And then even when I'd go camping or family trips or do events like our family reunions or our weddings, I'd photograph those. So I was kind of keeping my hand a little bit in it. But it was really in 2016 when our daughter went to school. My wife decided to go back to college as well. I bought my first DSLR. So I said, I got to play in this game. I had to do something different, So I decided to get a camera, get a little serious about it. But it took a few years. It wasn't really until 2019 when we were going to England to pick up our daughter who had just studied abroad there the semester before. So we went over there. I'm sure you have been to the Lake District.
I've
And
actually not.
really? Okay, even all your times you've been to like Scotland stuff, you haven't gone just a little south. Yeah.
No, well, I've only been to Scotland once, which was like 2 months ago. So yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you'd been a few times. All right. So, well, the District is awesome. So I recommend it. So fell in love with that and said, okay, I really want to do photography again, fairly seriously, and decided, how do I do that? I still have a full-time job. So I decided I'm going to start carrying my camera every day to work. And I still do this. And it's, I've only got about a 5-mile drive, so there's not a lot I can do in that time. But it's been a lot of fun, exploring my town since then. And I've become connected much more with the Aiken and Augusta art galleries, where I show my work, sell my work sometimes even. And then I also teach photography classes there, more beginning photo classes for people. And in the last few years, I've had maybe a little success getting my images in these local and regional galleries, as well as some national type galleries. As well as having some nice showings in some of the, larger international contests like NLPA. So
Yeah.
it's been a good little run for the last few years. So that's been kind of my roundabout way of getting here. So
Awesome. Yeah, let's talk about the NLPA thing. So you this year you won the NLPA In Your Backyard Special Award, which to me feels very aligned with the type of photography that you like to produce. What does photographing locally mean to you, both practically and philosophically?
Yeah, okay. First off, I really one of the few times I've actually to thank you and the rest of the NLPA judges for picking it, because I think, as we all know, any contest can go any direction, and so
For sure.
take the win when you can, right, kids? So I was really excited about getting that, and like I joked on my email back to you guys, I'm like, you can send it to the right guy.
Like, you got the wrong email.
Yeah, exactly, maybe. And luckily, like Tim, I think, was the one who fired back and said, no, it's you, and even an exclamation point. So I went, okay, good, I'm in the right place. So, and like I said, at the time, my goal was just to make it to the book. I was just excited to just get in the book. And then so I was like, oh, I've actually got a place here. So that's been really great. So thanks for putting me on the map, so to speak, in that regards. But yes, In Your Backyard really fits what I've been doing particularly for the last 6 years. You might even say when I was a journalist too, because you had to really get to know your own town and your area. But I also have kind of two definitions for local. One is like when I do kind of regional things, which like I camp in the upstate a lot, or I go visit my family in Florida or North Carolina. I do explore those areas fairly detailed. So I kind of feel like those are local areas as well. But really it's this Aiken, Augusta area. NLPA has the 25-mile is kind of the radius for that category of the contest. So it's, for me, about like, I bet about 90% of my work actually is maybe more like 10 miles or even 5 miles. My work is only 5 miles away. The place I work the most at is this Carolina Bay, and that's only 2.5 miles. It's actually almost exactly halfway to work. So it's like, that's my radius is actually very small, and I don't mind that at all. So it's actually a lot of fun. And practicality wise, like I said on my intro, my wife and daughter went to school at the same time in different places, obviously, but it made things more difficult because, being in school meant she had her work to do for a while. In fact, from 2021 to 2025, when she graduated with her master's degree, my wife wasn't even working. So there wasn't the resources necessarily to go travel, except if I was doing family events. So it was more like, if I'm going to try and tap into this photography thing, I better decide, how am I going to approach this? I backed up for a bit and said, all right, what did I do when I was a journalist? You work daily. You've got your daily assignments. You're doing something all the time. It's like, okay, I got to tap into that mentality again of getting to know my town, getting to know what's around me, and doing it consistently, and not just, every once in a while when something fun seems like fun, just actually get out there and do it. And to do it without much time or money. Just, it's cheap to do it at home. You just drive to your house, drive around your neighborhoods. I also started exploring some of these local parks and the back roads of the county, stopping by places on my way to work, even exploring my front yard, which ended up being kind of surprising that I was able to make pictures out of that, considering how crazy it is looking. So, like I said, I spent a lot of time at this place called the Carolina Bay, which is this small, like 24-acre park. So it's not like this big landscape that I can work in. It's really, really tiny. And about 5 or 6 acres of it is the bay or the little pond itself. So it's not like, I remember you having somebody on that did the Fontainebleau
Yes.
park area. It's not like that. It's very small. But at first, really, this started out as a necessity, but really it very quickly grew into something I really enjoyed. And discovering my little southern town has just been so much fun and really getting a lot out of it. So
Yeah.
I think it's been, like I said, a good connection. I'm really pleased when I didn't know which category I might have won. When I got that, I was like, that really fits. That actually helps kind of fit into what I'm trying to do. So thank you.
I feel like some people listening might be thinking to themselves, God, that sounds so boring, or I would get so tired of going back to the same spot over and over and over again. How do you keep it interesting and keep yourself excited about photographing those small, close to home areas?
I think part of it is what's grown up over time is that beauty of noticing things changing subtly. You might go into a place and see, oh, this is kind of neat and fun and everything. But then you come back a few days later, a month later, and you're like, oh, that's really changed now. This tree's fallen over, or this tree is growing a little bigger. It's full out. Oh, all the leaves have fallen off. You get a different feel. And if you're willing to discover some of those little differences, I think you can have a real blast. I think one of the things I noticed, and I'll bring up Carolina Bay, is there was a quote, I think, by Mark Twain was it Huck Finn? I think it is, when they're going down the river and Huck's talking to, I may have the wrong book, but that's what I'm going with.
It's all good.
Yeah, when Huck's talking to one of the riverboat captains, and the riverboat captain's like, yeah, there are two Mississippi rivers, one when you're going up and one when you're going down. And then he goes, well, there's actually four, because then there's daytime and nighttime. And when I think of a place like Carolina Bay, the water level changes, the leaves change, the light changes. You get these different quality when it's a sunny day and a cloudy day. You start noticing those things. So I kind of go, really, Carolina Bay has about 365 different places when you go there. And I think it's more just taking the mentality of, let's just see what happens. And I think, I need to be honest, if I would have walked in there during the summer, I probably wouldn't have had as exciting of a time. I wouldn't have realized, but I went in the first time I really ran across it was the fall when everything was lit up. So I think that kind of biased me a little bit that this is a really cool place. So I think that helps.
Right. So it strikes me that that approach to kind of like the dailiness of engaging in photography really informs and helps you as a photographer. And you've said that, like, if you don't practice regularly at home, that you're not really, quote unquote, in shape for bigger photo trips. Maybe expand on that idea and how local work sharpens your particular eye.
Yeah. All right. So it's kind of interesting. There's what came to mind when I was starting to think about this was, say you've got some buddies or people like me or you or whatever that maybe ran when they were in high school and stuff. And they're like, later on in life, they're like, oh, we're all going to go do a 5K together, right? And you've got the one guy, the rest of the people are they're starting to train, do some stuff. And they're like, yeah, I used to run. It's not a problem. I'll be fine. No problem. And they're like a couple of weeks out and they're like, are you sure you're going to be good? Oh yeah, actually I bought these new shoes and I bought these new shorts and I'll get the race t-shirt and I'll be good to go. We're all right. Get to race day, even though it might not be necessarily racing for time, he gets in, he goes running right away. What do you think's going to happen? They're probably going to pull a muscle. They're probably going to pull up and go, I can't do this. What type of experience are they going to have compared to the guys that trained, or at least did something to prepare for it, right?
Right.
And so I think going back to even the sense of, we've heard the term practice makes perfect, but it's not really that. It's practice is just what it is. It's just practice. And by doing that, especially on a daily level, you start noticing what catches your eye. Back to the idea that you're asking about, sharpening your eye. You start paying attention to what really kind of get drawn to. It could be all sorts of different things, or all of these things. It could be like trees or plants or water, people, landscape, overall, buildings, animals, whatever. But by going out there and practicing, you actually start noticing those things instead of just thinking it's going to be a great thing. The other thing that happens by doing this, practicing, not just sharpening your eye on what is interesting to you, but also getting to know your gear.
Right.
The other story that kind of comes to mind, I've heard you talk a number of times about when you've taught workshops, how you've got people that may not have picked up their camera since the last workshop a year ago, and you're then spending a little while teaching them again what to do. And I had this image in my head of like, man, I couldn't imagine going to, like, we'll say an African safari somewhere. You pull out your camera and these pride of lions is walking by, and all of a sudden you take a picture and everything's white. You're like, oh, wait, now what do I have to do? And then you figure out those settings for a minute. The lines are getting a little farther away. You get it. And now everything's dark. And you're like, oh, wait, what do I have to do again? Eventually you might get a picture or get it set. But by that time, the lions have left. So you've missed the light. You've missed the lions or missed the opportunity. Or those times when, I know we've all had it, when you're out shooting and the clouds are kind of cruddy and you're like, oh, this isn't very much fun. All of a sudden you've got that instant where the sun goes below the clouds and suddenly it lights everything up. So now the whole exposure and everything's changed. You're scrambled in to get the image. And again, you're frustrated and not happy about the whole experience. What's that going to do for you? So doing this daily, or at least a more consistent practice, gets you really feeling comfortable about your gear. As I've learned new things, I can flip really fast between what I'm doing now, in one moment to the next. I may move from a really dark scene to a really light scene. I may decide I'm going to do ICM. I may decide to do multiple exposure. It's like, I don't let that stuff bother me. I just go, boom, these are where they are on my menu. But that takes time and effort, and you can't just magically have it happen when you show up somewhere to go, oh, now it's all going to fall into place. So that's part of it. And I think the other thing that helps working consistently locally is back to the idea of what catches your eye and what you're photographing. Now you're thinking, okay, I'm going to do a workshop. I'm going to go on a trip somewhere. You start looking around more educationally. You're not going to be saying, oh, I listened to Matt Payne's podcast. I'll have to go do a workshop with Matt Payne, regardless of what you're necessarily going to teach in that workshop or where it's going to be. Or some, I know you brought up recently too, some influencers that may decide, oh, I'm going to go because this person's cool and I'm going to go to that place. But if you're really starting to pay attention to what's catching your eye and what you want to do, you're suddenly like, wait, I want to go to a conference where they are taking pictures of these things. They're in this location. I've really been listening or following this one photographer. I'd really like to be on a place where they are because they're doing pictures that I really am drawn to. But unless you're really paying attention to that stuff, you can't really make those decisions. It becomes almost more random. So hopefully, by doing these things locally, you start getting this catalog in your head. Over the summer, I did my first photo workshop since I did those workshops with Rich Clarkson in college. I went to Chicago for the Chicago Botanical Gardens with Out of Chicago group. So I picked that one because they had some other ones. There was other workshops groups that I had seen and followed, but I was like, okay, I really want to do flower photography. I knew most of the instructors one way or another, so I'd already made that decision of I had a connection that made it really worthwhile. And ended up producing really fun photos there and making some nice connections with the people there because I already knew what was going on. The other thing that happens by doing this, I knew what questions to ask. And I think that's what a lot of newer photographers or people that aren't consistent, they feel intimidated by the whole process. And so what ends up happening, they don't ask the questions because they think, oh, it's a dumb question. And really it's like when you know the questions to ask, then you start getting the answers to the things you want to learn. Right. I won't get too detailed into it, but I learned multiple exposure there in Chicago. And that was one of the things that was a big hang up for me. I was like, I can't do that. That's just too intense. Stephanie Johnson sat me through and walked it. And I was like, okay, that's great. Now I got it.
Time to go.
Yeah. That was really cool. So working more locally prepares you to go to do other things, I think, in a more comfortable manner. So that's why I would suggest
Yeah,
it.
and to your point, one of my favorite things about that approach is that it's low stakes, right? And it frees you up to take more risks. Like I know you had sent over a video for the Patreon episode I'm going to do that is actually going to be in the past at this point, but basically like you use those skills that you learned locally to just play and practice and try new things that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's not a big deal. Like you can go back out tomorrow and try again, and the day after that and the day after that. So like staying local and just trying weird stuff and taking risks when it matters more, like when you're in Africa, like you said, you'll know exactly how to respond, what to do, what settings to use, how to approach the technique, and then you'll be much more likely to nail it when it matters more. So for me, I think that local kind of daily practice makes so much sense if you want to get better as a photographer.
Yeah, and it's all about it. Just that confidence level. You just feel like I'm walking into this. I know that one of the things I really gained out of all the photography the last few years is I feel like I can walk into any situation and get something. It might not be great, but at least I'll feel like I got something.
Yep.
So yeah.
I feel the same way. Like every trip I go on, I come home with probably at least 50 to 60 images I love, which is a lot. I feel like my keeper rate's pretty high, but I think it's because I've done what you're talking about. Like I spend the time to practice, and I'm going to repeat it, but like John Sexton has one of my favorite quotes. I heard him speak at Out of Yosemite in 2020. He was the keynote. And he said, I'm not a better photographer than you. I've just made more bad photos than you have. And that's really what it comes down to for me is like, it's repetition. And the more mistakes you make and the more risks you take and the more you learn from those mistakes, the better photographer you're going to become. It just takes time. It takes the effort.
Yeah. And having the lower stakes, again, like you said, it doesn't matter. I'm in an easier position because I'm not being paid for my photographs unless I'm putting the one out I want.
Who is?
There is. That's a different story. Some people are trying to get paid to be photographers. I get you. That there's that extra, stress level. But for most everyday people, it's like, what do you have to lose? To go out and play and walk in your front yard and say, what happens if I do this?
Yes.
Boom, there you go. What happens? And then you find out, and then you do the next thing.
So shifting gears a little bit, I know that during COVID, you set yourself a midday photo challenge that pushed you towards slower, more intentional photography. I'm curious how that period changed your relationship with time, light, and expectation.
So as a landscape photographer, you're, been doing it longer than I have in that regards. When's the only time you can go out and shoot?
Obviously, right? Golden hour.
Exactly. Maybe you can get away with blue hour, if you really want to stretch things, right? Yeah. That's the only time to shoot. Exactly. And I didn't buy into that very quickly, very much. Even at the start, I knew that wasn't the way to go.
It is what people say all the time, though.
That's why I'm bringing it up. Yeah, exactly. But when I was a photojournalist, you didn't have that option. You got an assignment that was a morning press conference. You went out in the morning to get the press conference. If it was a midday parade, you went out in the midday for the parade. If you had to learn to shoot, high school football under those high school lights, or in the worst situation, which is those high school gyms, there's like no light, nothing. You got to deal with it. So
and
again,
it's orange.
Exactly. That's why at least at that time I was mostly shooting black and white because that was ugly. But oh my gosh, you kind of learn that you don't have that option. You got to go out and make it work for you. So, but we're journalists. We're not, art landscape photographers. So, that's not the same thing. But it is, right? One of the things as a journalist I saw one day, I was driving down, we would often have to go look for feature photos. And a lot of times it's the middle of the day because that's when you might have an opening to spend some time. I was in Utah at the time, driving up Provo Canyon, and I saw this guy on his snowboard on a rock pile. It's the middle of the summer, 2:00 in the afternoon. I'm like, what the heck? So I'm not going to obviously turn around and say, hey, I want to come back when the light's a little better. Can you come back here then? No, you got to pull over, pull out the big lens and take some pictures, and kind of come back with something cool no matter what. So that's kind of the mentality I went into landscape photography. So come to 2021 or 2020, we're stuck at home. Over the summer, I said, okay, what can I do to really make myself think differently? I said, okay, I'm only going to shoot from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. whenever I go out and shoot. And I'm sure most landscape photographers are shuddering right now. It's like, no, you don't do that. but you can, right? And it was interesting because right at that same time, I'd just been starting back into photography. I ran across the slow photography movement. And I know you've known some of those people. And they actually had challenges every quarter. And they were on the same wavelength as me. I mean, I had no clue they were going to do what they were going to do, but they had a hashtag for that quarter's challenge, which was no bad light. And that was the criteria. And I went, oh, that's too cool. That's right at the same time I'm thinking this. And the slow photography group, who has been like really instrumental at the beginning of my photo career, because they had a lot of really cool ideas about how to approach being local, if you want to think about that, or just getting back into photography. And so a lot of that was just to kind of push myself, and I think they did it too, to push themselves out of the comfort zone of what's typical or what's the only thing that's possible to shoot. So I said, okay, I'm going to go out in the middle of the day and see what I can find. And so again, we're stuck at home. Why not? And just like we just talked about a minute ago, it's like you can play and not have and the stakes aren't as high. So what's the lose? I found what was interesting is that I got the best results when using the sun almost as a spotlight, like through foliage and stuff like that. What was it highlighting? What was it showing? What was it revealing? Or what was it hiding? Just as important as what it was showing. And then what was really interesting is because I'd go into these wooded areas, seeing how it changes just over the minutes. Like I'm like, oh, that's a really cool shot. That's really neat little flower or something. And then within moments, yeah. Or just as likely, I'm like, oh, that's a neat thing. And I see that light coming. And then all of a sudden, the foliage gets in the way and it's not coming. It's not highlighting what I thought. So there is, it goes both ways. But it was fun to kind of see the light changing. And I think I think this is Freeman Patterson's quote, and I really like it, even if it's not. I don't know. It says, there isn't good light or bad light, just light. And it's up to you to use it. And I think that's the quote. And it's just like, it doesn't matter because each light's going to have its advantages and disadvantages. You just got to figure out how to work with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it really helped me better understand and expand when I could photograph, but it also what I could photograph. Because, going into other seeing things differently gave me the opportunity to go, oh, didn't notice that. Sometimes flowers bloom at different times of the day. They might not be blooming at sunrise when the light's really nice. They might not come out until the middle of the afternoon. So that's something, it's like, that's what you got to do. So as I learned I was taking breaks when I was home during that summer of COVID, and I'd walk out in my front yard and find some interesting flowers / weeds that were in the front yard and play around and try and get something. But what I really found was open shade was my friend. If I wasn't shooting against the light, which I really have enjoyed doing is shooting against the light, but also going into that open shade and getting things in that softer light, even in the middle of the day. It's like, look for those opportunities. And I think what we talked about a few minutes ago is it really lowers that expectations, of what is possible. And you're like, hey, I'm going to get a picture and it might not be really pretty, but it's teaching me something about what's in my yard, what's around me, what's possible. And so I would go out sometimes, still go back to the Carolina Bay a lot, and I would find little things. One of the things I noticed was a lot of the frogs weren't even though it was warmer, they would be more chill and they would kind of just hang out. And so I found this one shot, I call it my emo boy band frog shot. And so I've got these two like frogs looking in different ways. It's looking like, hey, we're just way too cool to be here type of thing. But it's like other time of the day, they probably would be hiding underneath something.
Right.
The middle of the day, they're happy to be in the sun. So you kind of go with that. One of the interesting things that I've learned is when I got more into black and white, how middle of the day for black and white is really kind of nice because you get these really harsh shadows, which I've really loved. And I know I've listened on one of your podcasts recently where you were talking about using infrared.
Yes.
And how much you enjoy and how it's different. Yeah,
It's
tell me
amazing.
about that.
Oh, man. Well, I actually just got back from teaching a black and white workshop in Death Valley.
Oh.
And I have one of my cameras is converted to full spectrum infrared. So basically the way that works is they strip off the Bayer filter on your camera sensor, which is intended to like filter out infrared light. And what they do is they remove that and they make it to where your camera can capture all spectrums of visible light and ultraviolet light and infrared light. And then you get these magnetic clip-in filters that go in between your lens and your sensor that filter for specific wavelengths of infrared or visible light. So what's cool about that is, You want to shoot visible light again? You can. You just put a filter in there and boom, you're back to normal again. But what I love is shooting in like 720 nanometer or 850 nanometer black and white. And I just use it for black and white. So I changed my color profile to black and white in the camera. And then it's all about looking for patterns, textures, lines, shapes, interesting light patterns, dark shadows, bright areas. But what I love about especially 720 is like it's really, really forgiving. So like you can shoot something that's super hot, super bright, and it's not going to be super blown out. It's nice and clean, and you still have interest in your shadows if you want them, or you can push it down really hard. It turns your blue sky to black, clouds become super white, and like green foliage turns to bright white. So you have all these really interesting contrasty things, and the infrared just really transforms your ability to shoot in all hours of the day and find interesting stuff to photograph. And so I'm with you. Like it's completely opened up a whole time of day that I can shoot normal scenes without really caring about harsh light, because it completely transforms the way it looks. I will say, going back to what you were saying earlier about the whole like, oh, it's middle of the day, you can still make good photos. Yes, and it doesn't mean you probably should get out your wide angle and be photographing like a bright blue sky with harsh shadows. Like it's probably not going to translate, but it does teach you to like how to leverage different light in different situations like you were describing. So definitely encourage people to photograph at all hours of the day like you're describing, and then learn how the different light can be used for different subjects.
Yeah. Actually, you bring up an interesting thing about the smaller scenes in the middle of the day, and not the wide angle, but maybe the longer lens.
Yes.
And isolate the stuff and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it was really interesting. Out of Chicago, a couple of people had infrared cameras or filters or whatever, and I think a lot of people got hooked on it. Like, this is a lot of fun. I think you guys said, it's become kind of a thing, but you either got to get into it or not, because it's not an easy transition unless you're using just filters, I guess, as opposed to
I would definitely not recommend just putting a filter on your lens. Like, I would recommend actually getting the conversion done. And I have a whole article on my website that I can put in the show notes for people to learn more about the conversion process, what to look for. There's all kinds of technical things it also introduces that most people aren't aware of, which actually what I loved about doing infrared is like, you got to relearn how to shoot again, because it's completely different. And I embraced that challenge, because it was like, I don't know, like ideally photography should be a little bit challenging, or else it's kind of boring and your work stagnates. And when you introduce something like infrared, like it forces you to relearn things and try new things. So I love playing around with new weird stuff like that. I think it's a great way to expand your horizons as a photographer.
Right. That's one of the things, teach photo classes and stuff. And when I'm talking to new people, they're like, there's so much to learn. I said, yeah, but that's the beauty of it,
That's
right?
the best part. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, you'll never get bored, because you do. And you'll be like, let's move on to something else, and
Exactly.
or go back to the basics. There's always something that can help make things interesting. So I'd heard you talk about that. Was like, that seems something interesting, and it piqued my interest about the IR stuff. So I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And back to what you were saying before, if people are interested in learning more about the slow photography movement, you can go back all the way to episode 210, where I recorded with Ernesto, Jennifer, and Beth Young about that.
Yeah. I had their names in my list too, because I was going to say it, but it didn't really fit in. So I'm glad you did, because I think they've been a real influence on my development as a photographer. Great.
Well, let's talk about your studio name. I think it's pretty interesting, pretty unique. One-Eyed Dog Studios. I think it stands out. Why not use your own name, and what does the idea of a studio mean for landscape photography?
Yeah. Well, as I was in my middle years, so to speak, like I said, those years when I wasn't working as a professional or back at it like this, I would play around with photography a bit, in fact. And we had recently gotten our little one-eyed dog, rescue dog named Rogue, and she was a rogue. That fit her name completely. But that was kind of the emphasis that, as I was thinking about doing anything photographically, I was like, that would just be kind of fun. And it was a gamble to do it, because I think most people do think of my name, your, first name, last name, photography, or photography of whatever.
And it's super creative.
Yes. And so, but it could be confusing to people.
Yes.
That it's like, and you're who?
It's a trade-off.
Yeah. And so I just said, I'm going to go with this just for fun. In fact, the first time I used it, I was with my little point and shoot. My daughter and wife, they've been in Girl Scouts forever, and there was a parade in one of the local towns. I was photographing that way back in 2009, and that was kind of like, I put it on for fun when I was uploading the pictures, and I put One-Eyed Dog on there. People were like, what is that? And so it kind of started a conversation, and I was like, okay. And then when I got serious and thought about it later, I said, maybe I'll keep that and just see how it goes. So when I got into Instagram, that's when I decided to really get serious about it. And it is kind of funny that, right, I'll introduce myself as, hi, I'm Patrick Krohn. And they're like, sure, who, whatever. I'm like, da-da-da-da. Oh, yeah, I go by One-Eyed Dog. Oh, okay. And so locally, it's been kind of interesting because some of the local people know me as One-Eyed Dog as opposed to Patrick. So I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. So, right, it was just something different. But the idea of studios, though, well, actually, I'll ask you this first, because I thought this kind of came up to me, which was like, the name of your podcast is the same thing. It's not the Matt Payne podcast, or like I've seen something lately, it's about the House of Pain. I thought that would be kind of fun too. But, you decided to call it, F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. So, I mean, how did that come about as opposed to the Matt Payne podcast? Something like that.
In all seriousness, I have some regrets about the name because a lot of people are like, oh, what's that about? You know what I mean? Like, it's super niche. But, my wife came up with it. I was like, I'm trying to come up with a name for the podcast. And I want something that's like a kind of like a double entendre of sorts. And where you like merge words together into something that means more. And it's based on the Vanilla Ice song, Ice Ice Baby. And he has a line in the song that's like, stop, collaborate, and listen. And so like she was like, well, why not F-Stop, collaborate, and listen? I'm like, oh yeah, it's like you're listening to a podcast and it's about photography. It's perfect, right? But, like it probably would have made more sense to call it like the landscape show or something stupid, you know what I mean? But like it's so generic, and it's like, do you want it to be easy to find and discover based on a search term? Or do you want it to be clever and interesting and spark a conversation? And it's hard to do both, I feel like, Yeah.
There's the easy way and the more common way and the less common way. And you pay the price, I think, in both regards.
I think you do. Yeah, I think, and it's something like sometimes I get frustrated. Like, this is going to sound so stupid, but like, I do all the social media for NLPA, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times I'm trying to find the person's account on Instagram so I can tag them on a post for NLPA. And so I search their name, nothing. And then I have to like do some more digging. And then I like find their website, and like their Instagram is like Alaska, whatever. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But like, I can't find that. You know what I mean? And so I think you do risk losing easy way to find you, but also, like you said, it's also becomes a part of your identity. So I feel like both can work for different reasons.
Yeah. And I think part of this whole marketing and all that stuff, really standing out at some point is going to be a plus. So hopefully for both of us, it works, right? So, but you did ask about, the studio part of the name. I've never been a studio photographer, but it just kind of flowed when I made it. And then I started thinking about it and was like, yeah, every place I go becomes my little studio. The little flowers become my models. The trees become my backdrop. The clouds are adding their part. The sun, is my lighting source, things like that. You kind of just use it, and it helped me, one, expand what a studio was, because I thought that makes it, again, kind of odd, because then people think it is an actual physical studio and I do portrait work or something like that. It's like, no, I don't. So again, adding a little bit of inconsistency and confusion to the mix, but it also, I think, flowed a little bit better. So I think that just kind of the end of that. And at the end of the day, I think it's kind of cool and fun. And I do have to say, if you've seen my little logo, the picture of the dog 3 times, I do have to make sure I have transparency on that. That is not my photo. That is my wife's photo. Because every time I would take pictures or try to take pictures, to turn on my camera, and again, if anybody remembers all those little point and shoots, it would go zzz, ding, when it's ready, she would run. And it was so funny. And so my wife just happened to get her phone out and get her this nice face where you can actually see she's only got one eye, because I never got one. Out of all the years we had her, I never got a picture of her that was good, except I do have a couple on my website, but nothing that I could use for a logo like that. It just fell into place. So I have to give her credit for at least taking a good picture for me.
That's awesome. Well, so let's talk more business stuff. I know that, like you said earlier, you spent a lot of years in sales. You've also, a pricing analyst. What has sales taught you that photographers often resist, but probably shouldn't?
Yeah. All right. So like I was in sales for 12 years. I did different types of sales, things like advertising, because I was in newspapers for a number of years. I changed over to copiers after that, and then fiberglass, all of them very different fields. And particularly being an introverted person, it made it a little difficult, but it was doable. I was actually fairly successful, but it was a very different world and decided to get out of that. But there were a lot of things I did learn in sales that I think become, transferable skills for a lot of different areas. And I think in photography, one of them that I think a lot of photographers don't think about or look at it in a negative way is being tenacious. And I think that's a really helpful one, because you don't really want to take no for an answer. And I don't mean that in a jerky way. I mean that in a way of, following what's important to you. So don't tell yourself no. So I think that's important as well. Go after the things you want to go after. If you want to photograph a certain type of thing, have a certain type of genre, certain type of ideas, go after them. So don't even, what I'm saying is even be tenacious with yourself, to go after things. Don't let people around you tell you no, oh, that won't work. You can't ever make that work for you. You're never going to be successful at it. Whatever those negative things people are saying, don't let them tell you no. So I think that's important. Interestingly enough, and I don't think enough people do this, is one of the histories of salespeople, good salespeople, is they ask questions. They ask open-ended questions, and you get people to talk about themselves. And it's really important. It's both for themselves. You ask yourself a lot of questions. Why am I doing this? What's catching my attention? Where do I want to go? What things are really important to me? That type of stuff is really important skill that I don't think people use enough. But I'll get into some of the other stuff later. And I think I look at someone like you, Matt, and how good you are at getting people to talk, because you ask those open-ended questions. You get people to go deeper into the history of themselves or more concepts and things like that. So asking questions is really important. Networking. And again, it's one of those that gets a lot of negative press. It's like, oh, I got to go out and network. And it's like, no. Think about your network as your friends. They're not people you use for a reason. They're like people you get to know. So you realize, oh, wait, I need to just go out and make friends. I don't need to necessarily get a network going. I think that it makes it too clinical. So think about it more as getting to know people, and they're people that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can share stories with, help edit your images, give you advice. Often I have friends that we share when certain calls are coming up and we know this is kind of their genre. You ship them that and say, hey, have you seen this? Do you know that's coming on? Make sure you don't miss it if you want to enter. And I think that's part of being in a network. It's not just, hey, I'm looking for a job, but it also means there are people out there that when you say, oh, I'm thinking about doing this, or yeah, I'd like to get a job doing this, people know that's what you're doing, and you'd be surprised how often they end up helping you because they know that's what you want to do. You want to work on a project. I heard many of your guests talk about this, where they want to work on a project. They start letting people know, and suddenly people are calling them saying, oh, hey, I heard you wanted to do this because a friend of a friend of a friend set this in motion. You kind of go, okay, that's great. But I think on that regard, you have to do it, in reciprocate with your friends. Don't just wait for them to give you information or help you. You got to jump in and help them when they want someone to edit their work, when they want someone to help give them ideas on a project. Mm-hmm. So it's not a one-way street. And that's why I think people don't realize it's more being friends with somebody as opposed to networking with somebody. Something I don't think a lot of people, or they discount or don't like to do, is market themselves. And that's something I think, unless you're doing it professionally, people think, oh, I don't want to have to market myself. But it's like, no, I think we all need to market ourselves to some extent, because really we all have to start believing in ourselves. And if you don't have that belief in yourself, I mean, no one else is going to believe in you. If you think or can't do something, you're going to be able to, push yourself just that little bit farther. That's got to come from with you. So if you feel like you can put yourself forward, put yourself forward. And it's kind of funny that one of the things I did after the NLPA stuff was I threw on kind of jokingly that, hey, if you're looking for somebody for your podcast, give me a shout, right? And then I was kind of expecting it, be a year or two before you'd get around to someone like me, but it's just like, okay, cool. But it's like, if I didn't put that out there, you'd be like, okay, there's no interest, so there's no way to do it. So I think that's really important to just say, just on a lark sometimes, say you want to do something, see what happens. It may be great, it may not. You don't know, but just market yourself because no one else is going to put you out there if you don't.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I can't remember where I saw this. I think maybe it was on Threads, but someone made a post about not everyone has to monetize their photography. Like, it's okay to just have it as a hobby. And I totally agree with that 100%. And I think oftentimes I feel like most people try to monetize their photography journey way too early in the process. But I think that's different than what you're describing here. Like, the marketing aspect, it's not necessarily always tied to making money, right? Like, I think sitting down and asking those marketing type questions forces you to be honest with yourself about, like, where do you want your photography journey to take you? What do I want to focus on? What are some of the places or the things I want to photograph? And I think, like, thinking about it from a marketing perspective, it forces you to, like, take your photography in a direction that's less haphazard and chaotic, which for some people might work fine. But for me, like, having, like, something to focus on is useful.
Yeah, and I think most people want to have a direction for their photography. And whatever it is, don't be haphazard. Kind of ask those questions and ask the questions of your friends. You'd be surprised what they're seeing in your work that you don't sometimes. I think that makes a difference. So like, oh, why do you always do this? Case in Beth Young, she was doing an image review and I sent her some pictures and she said, oh yeah, I really like your work. You really love to make these really black blacks. You're not afraid of that. And I went, really? I didn't even notice that about my work. I know I do it, but I didn't really notice it, And it's become a thing, actually, a joke between the two of us. The way we process is like, polar opposite, but we each like each other's work. But that's kind of the point, is sometimes by asking other people about even your own work, you'll get responses that you don't expect. And I think that's kind of cool if you're open to it. Hopefully it becomes positive and you're not going to be like hating your friend now. One of the other things that is little things that almost sounds like almost cliche, but they're important, is do what you say you're going to do. Return those emails and those phone calls. Actually, before we recorded, we were talking about returning emails and how impressed I was that actually you returned my emails when I sent you, a little note to say, hey, thanks for, judging in NLPA, and you fired back. And every time I've ever emailed you, you've given me some response, and I appreciate that. And I think, why do you do that? What drew you to say, oh, I got to do this?
Yeah, I feel like it kind of goes back to the golden rule. Like, I expect that if I'm going to send somebody an email, I'm kind of being a little bit vulnerable. I'm opening myself up, and I would love to get a response back. Even if it's, hey man, I got your message. Like, I'm super busy right now. I can't talk. Or yeah, let's dive in. Or hey, let's schedule a time to talk about that or whatever. But like, the worst is when you send an email to somebody and this just gets ignored. It's just, to me, and I get it. Like, I've had days where I'll get 40 or 50 emails a day, but it's important. Like, respond to people, like, make them feel the way you want to feel when you send an email to somebody.
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting because recently I had a guy contact me and said, hey, I'm working on this project around Aiken. Would you be interested? And so I wrote him an email back, pretty quickly and said, yeah, that's great. He called me. We had this great conversation. He's bought a bunch of my pictures for his website. And he had said, after we started getting to know each other, he goes, you're the first one in the area that actually called me back. There was a couple other people, and finally he found my name because the art center contacted Patrick, and that was great. I appreciate them for that. But he had contacted a bunch of photographers and said, I'm working on this. Are you interested? And nobody got back to him. So it's like all those people could have had a job.
Dude, it's wild. I hear that all the time from people who buy a print or whatever. It's like, yeah, you're like one of the only people who actually responded. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you want to differentiate yourself in photography land, respond to emails and phone calls. And you'll be like way above the curve. It's insane to me.
Yeah. Is it what they say, half the battle is showing up? I mean, the other half of the battle is saying something, replying back.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Because I feel like I'm one of the busiest people I know, and I have time to do it, but it's also because I've prioritize that as something I think is important. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go through a couple others that I've thought of if you want. Send thank you notes, which kind of falls into the email thing. I think that goes a long way. I usually, after every contest or call or something, if I've been, the jurist has put my stuff in or placed or something, I usually send an email to say, hey, thanks. And I am surprised at the ones that I get back just as much as the ones I don't. I expect not to get an email back. But there's been a few that actually, like you and a couple others, that I actually had a conversation with. I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of nice, because I assume everybody's super busy, but it's kind of nice when they take the effort. And I think we as regular photographers, putting that extra effort out shows the people like yourself or these other people that are taking the time to be judges, to juror calls and stuff like that, that it is appreciated, that it's not just a check for them, but actually helps us as photographers feel like, oh, our work is getting seen. And so I think it's worth noting to these people that you appreciate that. Have target lists. And I think people think about lists and have, kind of comes and goes on what that means to them. But I think it's like, it can be like the contests you want to enter, the photos you want to use, the galleries you want to work with, the publications you want to go to, the stores you want to get in contact with. It could be a whole list of things that is important to you. And again, back to the idea, this is more for people that maybe want to monetize things. But I think if you want to get your work out there, you got to have a list, because otherwise you won't be able to keep track of it. And then do the research about your list, about the people you want to do work with. Don't just show up. Make sure you've actually talked to them, done some background work, seen what's important to them, so that you can actually have a meaningful conversation. And this is kind of an interesting thing, talking about questions. When you're, again, back to more the monetizing, but not even just the monetizing, but even if you're entering contests or whatever, but more trying to work on an overall business. So yeah, we'll say that. I'll ask you this. What's the worst answer you can get when you ask a question if you want to do something with somebody?
No.
Actually, no is the second best answer, because they don't want to do it.
Yeah, so no answer at all?
No answer at all, or a maybe, because then you end up spending like, oh, this might become something. And then you go after it, and then you get another maybe. And eventually you got to cut your losses. But no actually is not a bad answer. And
it's actually a great answer. You're right.
Yeah.
Like, especially in sales, like I did a podcast with Nikki Rausch way back in the day. Yep. And her whole thing was like, work to the no. And like, the more opportunities you can give your customer an opportunity to tell you no, the better, because it's less time you have to waste on that particular interaction. And waste is maybe a bad word, but like, if someone's trying to buy a print off of me and they have all of these questions, and like after I have my discovery questions for them, like what are they really looking for? Like what are their pain points, whatever, like then I'm going to start like, can I help you put in an order for that size of that print on my website? And if they say no, then I'm like, okay, cool. Then reach out when you're ready, because now I'm going to focus on other things that I need to spend time on.
Exactly. I had somebody do a door-to-door sales promotion to me one time. We always get these. And I said, stop, don't even, this is not something I'm interested in. They go, no, you're not helping me. And I said, I was in sales for so long. I'm helping you to get onto the person who actually can and is interested in what you're selling. Not even just that, but I think just getting over the concept of hearing no makes you, because then you back up and then say, okay, why are they saying no? Is it just the not right person? Is it just my work isn't what they're looking for? Whatever, you can get into all the different categories. But I mean, don't get too hung up on somebody saying no, that, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. It's like, no, people are going to say no. Move on, like you said. So,
well,
yeah.
And man, you said something earlier about doing the research. And one of the most frustrating things for me is how many people are using AI as a crutch right now for communications. And I get it, like, especially if you're trying to do broad outreach and you're trying to cast a wide net. And for example, like I get AI driven emails for people wanting to come on a podcast, 10, 15, 20 a week. And I just put them all in the trash can, because it shows me that they haven't put in any effort or to research the show or who I am or why they might be a good fit. Like I have a link on my website that says podcast, and in like the first paragraph it says, if you have an idea that you want to pitch, here's the link to use. So they haven't even done the very bare minimum of research to like show me that they're even halfway interested in becoming a guest on the podcast. And I think that goes for pretty much any type of communication that you're trying to have it doesn't even have to be monetization or professional. It's just put in a little bit of effort to like show that you've put in a little bit of homework and you're going to set yourself above the bar so easily. It's wild right now. Mm-hmm. Like AI has made people stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. There's certain parts of it that make them more productive, but right, it's not helping in many regards, unfortunately. Yes, so exactly. Unless you know how to use it.
Right.
So,
okay, yeah, or like use it. My thing with that is like, you can use it, but you still need to like be the human behind the message.
Yeah.
You know,
I just saw I was just listening to the podcast with the couple, now I've forgotten their name, that did all the AI stuff. They're out of LA and stuff. And
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's some cool work. And I appreciated that podcast because it's like, I think so often like you hammer for NLPA, how honesty in photography and all of that. But to see, it's like you've always said, it doesn't matter what you do, just be honest about it. Totally. And that couple was totally, this is what we do. And they make some beautiful work, you know? So It's just like, great, do it, have fun. I mean, he sounds like he was really enjoying and struggling with learning how to do it, which is even more wonderful, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought that episode up because I was thinking about that one today. I was wondering, like, I wonder if I alienated some of my audience by having them on because they're using AI in their photography. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to, like, when they actually reached out to me very intentionally, and my first reaction was like, oh, no way, that's like people are going to hate that. But then I was like, you know what? Like, let's be open-minded. Like maybe people will get something out of it and see how, you know, it's not a black and white world we live in, baby. Like there's nuance and there's gray areas and it's all in how you think about that stuff.
It's how you think about it. And I think what has been your soapbox is being honest about it. You know, just being straight about it, going, this is what we do. This is how you do it. Great. I don't manipulate. But then you go, wait, that looks manipulated. You know, we use AI. We use Photoshop. That's cool. You know, it's just that honesty, I think, is important.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So one thing I know that you've mentioned is that you said that not everyone is our customer. How did you learn to accept that, and how freeing has it been creatively?
I think that's interesting is what's the usual answer most people give when you go, hey, who's your customer? What do you think?
I feel like most people haven't thought about it.
Right. But
they say, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say that's probably a better answer than the one most people give, which is everybody's my customer.
Oh,
you know?
Right.
And you're like, are they really? So I think just as important of a question to ask is the flip side, which is, who is not your customer? And you might want to, you know, decide on, you know, if you're doing one genre of photography, you're probably not going to ask people that are interested in another genre of photography. And I guess at this point, what's interesting is you're looking more external than internal at this point.
Right.
So we're making that shift of this is the work I'm trying to do. This is how I want to do it. That's the internal side, which you bring up so wonderfully throughout the podcast. This is saying, okay, now who on the outside is going to like my work? Who is going to buy that work, or who's going to want to use it for their editorials or something like that? What I want people to think about is instead of people chasing the market versus developing the market that fits their work. And I think people often start with, oh my gosh, those people over there, they are the people I want. And it's like, are they really? And I think instead create the work and then realize, okay, who are the people that I think are more likely to want this type of stuff? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess the thing to think about is, who is going to value my work? Who's going to look at this and say, this is what I want, besides your family? You know, your family is going to always value your work, right? So I start with something like what I call the extreme game. So if you're, we'll kind of put some barriers to this. So if you're a car photographer, are you going to show up to a horse show? And if you're a horse photographer, are you going to show up and buy a booth at an auto show? And some of those people may be, yeah, but those people are in the same economic group. You know, they probably have the extra money, but it's like, but why fight it? Why work hard by going to a group that might be it? As opposed to, if you're an auto person, go to an auto show. If you're a horse person, go to a horse show. And I know I don't want to offend anybody by saying this, but there's the old adage that, you know, talk about in sales that, oh, he was so good, he could sell ice to an Eskimo, right?
Right.
But it's like, if I'm in sales, why work that hard? If I'm going to Alaska to sell something, what am I going to sell? Snowmobiles, skis, heating equipment. It's like, why work hard at it? Go to where the people are. If you're going to sell ice, come south here. We need the ice. We want to keep cool. So go to where your market is instead of feeling like, oh, I've got to make these people buy my stuff. Look, you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, it's kind of salient for me right now, too, because a lot of what you're talking about, too, ties into authenticity. And I find a lot of photographers, because of the economic pressures of making it as a full-time photographer, a lot of people do things that probably necessarily is not what they find joy in. It's maybe not even authentically close to things that they even believe in or believe strongly in, or, they're like, well, yeah, I'm going to do this commercial for a grocery store, even though I'm a landscape photographer. Like people are trying to do whatever it is to make ends meet. But I think psychological research has shown it time and time again that the more you can align your activities with who you are authentically as a person and what you believe in and your values, the more happy you're going to be, the more satisfaction you're going to get from the photography, from just being alive. And it's funny because it's salient for me because I have a whole chapter on it in my book, but I was doing my final proof of my book yesterday, so it was like top of mind. But what you were saying just resonates really loudly with kind of that particular aspect of authentic living as well.
Right. That's kind of what I'm trying to say by create your work and then find the market instead of, oh my gosh, everybody's selling this type of photo. I better make that type of photo or go out and photograph that thing. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to make these photos. These are what are calling to me. This is what's interesting to me. You'll be surprised of what group of people, and you don't need many, and you will suddenly go, oh, wow, that's really cool. Going back to contest a little bit, I had a friend who, because this kind of fits in, who during the contest would sometimes decide, I think I can make this photo and it'll get in. And then it would get in, but then he'd be like, it was okay. I don't really feel great about it. It's the same thing. It's like, instead of, giving out the photos where my attitude has always been, I'm going to put the photos in that I think match what they're looking for in general, but they're my photos that I really want. And if it wins, great. If it doesn't, whatever. But I think, I think he could tell after doing it a few times, it pads out the resume, but it doesn't feel as authentic. It's kind of the same thing. It's like, I made this really cool picture for these people, but it has nothing to do with what I really like to make.
Yeah, and I think that can lead to burnout. It can lead to disillusionment with your enjoyment of photography. It can lead to lots of negative feelings about the whole ecosystem of photography. I don't know if you caught that the recent episode I did with Mark Handy, where he quit talking about how and why he quit photography.
I think I remember
and
that.
I think it is a perfect example of what you're talking about. Like, he was doing it because he knew that certain scenes and certain light would sell in his gallery, which was all driven by his gallery sales manager making those decisions for him. It wasn't driven by the things that he loved, the places he loved, the subjects he loved. And I think, as a result of that, he quit photography because it was no longer enjoyable. And I've seen so many people do that, especially in landscape photography. They chase iconic scenes that everyone else has already photographed before. They're photographing scenes that, like, for an art show, like, oh, I've been told, like, I have to have these kinds of photos to do well at art shows. And it's like, yes, and you can also do your thing and do what you're talking about, which is like, find where it makes sense. Where's the Venn diagram? Where's the overlap? Where's the fit, right?
Yeah, and some of the galleries I've been involved with, they have some really out there stuff, which is really kind of cool, because then it's like everybody's doing something different and you've got a variety of things. And yet I'd walk into them and be like, that's never going to sell. Oh, wait, that's got a red dot on it. It's sold. You're just like, okay, there's people out there. So if you're photographing, you're producing the things that matter to you, people are going to see that. And I think that's what you keep getting to. And that's going to be, and it may take, back to the name thing, whatever, it may take more time, but it's going to have more rewards in the long run. And I think that's what makes the difference.
Yep.
I do have kind of a fun marketing story that comes from a slightly different angle that I think kind of fits here a little bit, which is friends helping you. And back to the networking thing even, which is on Facebook, I had a couple of friends tag my name, and I'm always like, okay, I'm kind of curious of why they would do that, because it was just their name and my name. So I scrolled up and was looking at what the post was, and the person was looking for Aiken landscape photographs for her home. I'm like, oh, there's other landscape photographers. I'm sure through all these other people, they have posted on their stuff. Everybody who posted on there was a portrait photographer. It was like, oh, come look at my stuff. Come look at my stuff. And you'd click on it. You're like, you're a wedding photographer. You're a portrait photographer. Why do you think that they're going to come to you just because you're a photographer? It's like that you may say, well, I can take some pretty pictures. It's not the same thing as a good landscape photographer producing good landscapes. I don't want to shoot, weddings and portraits. So I'll let you guys do that. Don't get in my market. But the idea was she was actually specifically asking for something, and people were just, photo is photo, and it's not. And that's kind of part of this whole thing too, is, understanding where we fit in the world helps, as well as where, our friends fit in the world. And I appreciated my friends, because I did make a nice big sale out of that, and I ended up becoming a good friend. And I think that's, important, is knowing where you land in the world is just as important as who you go after.
Yeah, I see so many people, especially new photographers, chasing, and I did it too. I get it. But like chasing what other people have already done well, because it looks like it's successful. But I think at the end of the day, if you do that, you're going to get tired of it. It's not going to feel you enough. And eventually you're just going to burn out or just not enjoy it at all. So,
or
unless
eventually
you're totally in it to make money and that's all you care about. But I haven't met that many people that way. They exist,
or you have that, or you have that epiphany where, oh wait, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to do it now.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Seth Godin. You like to talk about Seth Godin's idea of the purple cow. First of all, what the hell is that? And what does that look like in photography, especially for someone working locally rather than chasing epic destinations?
Yeah, okay. This kind of fits into what we were just talking about, I think, and flows pretty nicely. So Seth Godin, business marketing type of person. Only read a few of his books, but one of his books is called Purple Cow. And it's basically saying the idea that you're driving down the road, you see all these cows and stuff like that. Like, yeah, it's a cow, whatever. And you see this purple cow. You're like, what's going on there? It's something that catches your eye in such a way that it stands out. It's kind of fun. It's kind of, different and exciting is really what a purple cow is. And he just coined that phrase to kind of throw you off. Get you to kind of stop and think about it. Give to me, what you're thinking of epic destinations and stuff like that. Give me like one or two that you think of that are overdone.
Iceland.
Okay.
And let's go with the Faroe Islands.
Okay. So Iceland and Faroe Islands. So those are just other cows. I mean, they're still beautiful places. You're still going to make wonderful pictures there, right? But how much are you going to stand out against everybody else that has been to the Faroe Islands and Iceland, right? And a purple cow is the idea that something you do that only you can do. And I think this goes back to a lot of times you hear from you and from other people is what makes you unique isn't showing up in the same spot that everybody else has. Everybody else lined up, get that picture of, the diamond, what is it? Diamond
Beach.
Diamond Beach. Yeah. That you had somebody on recently that was talking about that they showed up the first time and nobody's there. Now you go there, there's hundreds of people there. It's how much fun is that? So really start thinking about stuff that's unique to yourself. That's kind of what the purple cow is getting to. And I bet where you live, there are some nice and interesting things that only you can photograph, that no one else can. And that starts you down the path of, just like we said, just talked about the authenticity, of just being your own self. Photograph the things that are closest to you. You're going to be like, nobody else is probably photographing those things. So you don't have to compete. When you put what may or may not be a great photo, but nobody else has a photo of that, it stands out. So suddenly you're like, okay, that's something that's unique to you. I go back to the cypress tree that I've taken. There are cypress trees in South Carolina. There's South Cypress trees that you see on Instagram from all over the Southeast, and I know the ones like in Texas and Louisiana, great pictures, but they all kind of become, more cows. They're all kind of the same to some extent, even though every one of them's beautiful in its own way. But they're not like mine. I have a shot in a place that nobody even knows exists, basically. What kind of makes that stand out? And people get excited about it when I show it to them. And they're like, that's not Aiken. I'm like, yeah, that's right here. That big park that we go over here? Yeah, right across the street. These exist. I'll show it to you. And I think people get excited about that because it's something new, it's exciting, and it's local. And I think local is much easier to get excited about than something far away. Again, back to, yes, maybe monetizing and stuff like that, but if nothing else, making yourself stand out. But I think even to the monetizing, you go into a local gallery, like say you want to start making connections with one of the local galleries, you show up with all these pictures from Iceland, the Faroe Islands, but you live in, like me, South Carolina, or even you in Colorado, whatever, it's going to be like, okay, yeah, these are pretty,
Right.
but who's going to buy them? So I think you got to really think about, as you are niching down almost to the local, you're actually going to get other people excited about it. And exploring the local areas to you actually would be much more meaningful to you as a person, because we're back to, this is your community, this is where you have a connection. It's easier to get people excited about that because it's not so far away. Like I grew up, like I said, as a journalist. Good journalism is local. It's all, the more local something is, the more people are going to be interested in knowing that good news or the bad news, whichever it is. It's a way to build your brand. Over time, what you create may become a purple cow because nobody else is doing it. It's like you're the only one that's decided to niche into this. And suddenly you're like, oh, this is actually really pretty cool. Something else about one of the other purple cows I think about, and this kind of relates in a second, is the camera companies, have their ambassadors, and that's kind of, at first, I don't know who did it first. That was originally, I think, a good purple cow, because people are like, ooh, who's the ambassador? What's that mean? It's become a little overdone, but I still think people look at those people as something a little bit special, done their work. And so I think that's kind of neat. And so I'm kind of getting more connected with my Aiken community and the local city government, stuff like that. I just had some conversations this week with some people that liked one of my blog posts, and they were like, hey, let's do some stuff. So I'm suddenly going, okay, is there a way for me to kind of become an ambassador for Aiken? And I think about anybody else kind of as they get to know their town, suddenly they may decide, oh, wait, this is really pretty cool. This is a place I live. And they start showing off that town may want them to do, like, help them do ad campaigns, help, promote the area for tourism, for relocations, whatever it is that makes that town cool. And I think that's something that only the person who lives there can do it. You can't easily bring in people, that are just come in, shoot some pictures or whatever. You've suddenly broke the groundwork yourself. So I think that's something that I've just recently thought of. But I want to kick this back to you, because one of my favorite purple cows is the NLPA scorecards. I don't know how that came about, because that's why I'm really curious about this, but I know as a participant in that from day one, the first year, when that came on my email, I'm like, what is this? Oh my gosh, I've got like a scorecard that shows me what the judges thought about my pictures, how it did in the contest. I don't know if anybody was doing that before you. I've seen a few kind of doing it, but not as well as you guys. And then the other part of a purple cow is it gets people talking about it. It gets that buzz on the other side of it. There's a few other contests that do some things, but I also think, it's really important that you get your participants to suddenly go, using your name consistently, I got this far, I got this happen, stuff like that. So please talk about a little bit of where that came about and how that even gets done.
Well, it was very intentional. So when we set out to create NLPA, the value system that we were operating under and the principles that we were operating under were very much around, how do we make competitions more interesting and valuable to people entering them, and they don't just feel discouraged and feel like they don't hear anything back, and also that like they're getting something in return for entering the competition, whether that be feeling like they're part of a community or getting more eyeballs on their photography that quite frankly is very difficult to do now with social media, especially if your photography is not the kind of stuff that's like super flashy and your face type stuff. So it was operating under those principles. And then one of the main complaints that I have, and I think almost every person who's ever entered a competition has, is that sometimes it feels like you're putting your work out there and then it's like in a black hole and you never hear anything back, and you don't necessarily know why your images didn't do well, or like how did you compare to the other people who entered. And so we wanted to provide a way to provide that feedback to people in a format that was digestible and easily shared with others. So that's where the scorecards came from. And then obviously, like you said, it also becomes like a marketing engine because it's got our logo on it and people are talking about the competition. And so, yeah, that was all very intentional on our part. We never thought about it as a purple cow per se, but we definitely felt like it was something that other competitions weren't doing well, that we felt like we could do better than others were doing. And then to answer your question about how, so fortunately, Tim is a coding wizard, and like everything that we do is all, there's data is attached to it. So whenever you enter NLPA, it goes through multiple stages of entry, which is all cataloged in a giant Lightroom catalog. And then those catalogs become iterative and cumulative in terms of the data that's stored within them. So we can see stage 1, this is what happened, who rated it how, stage 2, stage 3, finals. And so we have all of that data, and then it just became a matter of like exporting the data and then filtering it into a system that creates those PDFs that are so Tim coded it all. So like once we have all the scoring completed, he just runs a script and it creates all those PDFs. So it's not like we're hand creating them. That would be crazy, right? Because I mean, there's like 12, 13, 14,000 images that have certificates. So it's a massive undertaking. And honestly, we wish we could do more. Like we would love to be able to like have judge comments attached, but like just the logistics of that is just mind boggling to think about. So, I mean, it'd be, if you had, I don't know, 500 entries, yeah, you could do that, right? But 12,000, it's just not feasible. So yeah, it's, we've always wanted to find a way to give value to people and feedback and constructive criticism, things like that. So it's just one of the small ways to do that.
Yeah, and as I say, and as a contestant, I appreciate it because it just showed up, and I was like, wow. And like this year, when it took a little bit to get them, I'm like, where are they? I got to know. I'm going to see what I got, besides my one, because I just thought it's good to have that extra little feedback of, okay. And for me, and I'm sure the other photographers too, you see a consistency. You can see that, there were some pictures that, okay, one judge really loved it. Everybody else was kind of cold on it. Or a whole bunch of people liked it. It just didn't make the cut, but it was consistent. So I'm like, okay, that kind of tells me one thing. It was all way down low. Okay, that tells me something else, And I think that at least gives you some sense of, if not the marketability, at least what people thought of it. At least I should say, because I think contests are all this, at least what that set of judges said at that moment. Yeah.
On that particular day.
Yeah, right.
Which is even crazier to think about. Like, there's actually been research done on like the time of day, the day of the week that you look at photos. It completely changes your perception of them. So like if we forced judges to only look at the images in the morning or something, like it would have a different outcome.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to think about.
Yeah, you've even brought up sometimes a photo that earlier on maybe one person championed and everybody else was like, I don't get it. And then later on when they really sat and looked at it, they were like, you're right, that is a really cool picture. Maybe that should be something. So, again, different day, suddenly everybody gets it.
Well, and I think that's another way that our competition differentiates itself from the rest, is that there's actually judge interaction and they actually have conversations, especially if it's an image they feel strongly about. Whereas like if you have International Landscape Photographer of the Year, I had 4 images that made the top 200 images, right? 4. And within there, I had 2 images that were scored like 100 by 2 judges. But then there's one judge who rated it like a 70. And then it brought my score all the way down. And so what happens is you have like one judge can impact the entire outcome of the entire competition. And what you end up having is you have the winning images are really just the ones that everyone was like happy with. Because it's like this, they probably were scored like consistently like 85, 87, 88. But no one was like super in love with it, gave it 100. Whereas like the more avant-garde images that have more going on, that maybe one person really appreciated for whatever reason, there's no conversation that happens where you can talk about what makes the image work and why you like it. Doesn't mean you're going to sway anyone's opinion, but maybe those other judges hadn't considered those things yet. So I think it's a better process, personally.
Yeah. But as you've said, it's very time consuming too, but I think it's
crazy.
valued. Yeah. Well, from one person's perspective, I think it's valuable. Thank you.
I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
Well, we could probably keep talking for another 2 hours on all these topics that we have here, but
Yeah, I was
I'm
kind
not
of
sure
going to ask
we
you.
have a ton of time for it, but I'd like to save one for our Patreon supporters at the end. So if people haven't ever known this, like there are bonus episodes where we talk about a completely different subject. You can find those on Patreon. I know, Patrick, you're a Patreon supporter, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So my last question, though, before we do that is, who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some people that we need to learn about?
Okay. So I've picked 3 women that have been kind of influential in some regard to me over the years that are slightly different than I think you normally would have talked about. But I think the way you're expanding your thought process about the podcast, I think they could very easily fit in. The first one's Anne Jostrab. She is the executive director of the Center for Photographic Art in Carmel, California. And obviously people probably understand where Carmel is because that's where Ansel Adams and Brett Weston and that whole crew had their starts or planted for a long time. And the Center for Photographic Arts there has its roots in that group. So it's an outshoot of that. And Anne's the executive director. And she's one of those people that after a review with her, I think it was the Atlanta Photography Group when I was a member there, I had sent her an email, said, hey, thanks for doing the review. I appreciated it. I got some good information about it. And she wrote me a nice note back. And I was like, okay, great. I learned a lot of good stuff through that and other things that she's done of how much cool stuff goes on at the center out there, especially since COVID when a lot of stuff got put online. So I think that's one of the neat things about it is finding out what's going on there. She does image reviews every few months and stuff like that. And she was really helpful with me as I was getting ready for NLPA, actually putting my images together. She helped with that. So she does that. They have online artist talks that I listen in on, and they're all over the place. I mean, that is really cool because I get to see all these other artists that have done some really amazing photography across all sorts of different genres. And it's really funny because afterwards I think to myself, I got to quit photography. These people are just too freaking good, but then I go, no, they're doing their thing. I'm doing my thing. Just get over it and move on. But they're just, it's really cool to see because you see this history of these people. And I think it's great. And I think there's a lot going on there. So I think she would be an interesting conversation if you want to. If not, just check out the Center for Photographic Arts. The other one is Carol Guzzi, who is a 4-time Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, newspaper photographer. She has no clue who I am, but I ran across her when I was at the University of Missouri. We host the Photographer of the Year for both newspaper and magazine at the time. They were doing that. And she won Newspaper Photographer of the Year there. And so she came to give a presentation and then be a judge of College Photographer of the Year. But I was just impressed with the way she presented herself, things she did, how she did things, and just looking at her career as the photographer she is and the war zone she's been in, the topics she will photograph and things. She does such putting a human face to things and just amazing how beautiful she does her work. I think she would be an interesting conversation. And again, even if she doesn't get on here, please check out her work because I think it's just phenomenal. And my last one is Anne Belmont. She's been kind of influential on me on the landscape, intimate landscape, flower photography, things like that. Because I think she's just does beautiful work like that. She talks about it all the time. I love her stories, just the way she approaches things. I got to meet her this summer out of Chicago and talk about doing stuff locally. Interestingly, most of her work is out of the Chicago Botanic Garden. And you may say, oh yeah, well it's a garden, but it's still one place and doing phenomenal work. She's not traveling all over the world, though she does sometimes. So another person who's doing local work and doing phenomenal local work. So it doesn't have to doesn't have to be a garden, but it can be, anything. So I think she would be a good person to get to know if your audience doesn't know who she is yet. So those are my people that I want to put out there.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Patrick, this has been awesome, man.
Cool. I had a lot of fun. Hope I didn't mumble too much.
No, you're good. You're good. Well, thank you all for joining me for another awesome episode. Big thanks to Greg Lamming, our newest Patreon supporter. Greg, I truly appreciate you stepping up to support the show. If this conversation with Patrick resonated with any of you or gave you a nudge to rethink how and why you photograph, I'd love to keep that conversation going over on Patreon. That's where this podcast really stays alive. It's where episodes like this are made possible, where listeners connect more directly, and where I can keep putting time and care into thoughtful, long-form conversations instead of chasing internet algorithms. You can support the show on Patreon for as little as a few dollars a month, and it makes a huge difference. You can find a link to Patreon in the show notes or visit patreon.com/fstopandlisten. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, leaving a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify helps more than you think. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.